So the Jalen Duren thing, with how he was in the playoffs and how I've seen him progress over his career, it had me thinking of a couple of other players with similar builds and similar sort of possible trajectories at similar points in their career. So the way I see it, there's kind of two general paths that Duren could take. Now, last year, this was all very much in the air. It's July 2026 right now. So this year, things are a little clearer. The two paths that I see for Duren are either something like Amare Stoudemire, someone who came into the NBA out of high school. Duren only had 1 year and was like the youngest player in the league when he came in. Very athletic, man-child type bodies, immense upper body strength even at a young age, tremendous hopping ability. But ultimately, for reasons I'll talk about in a little bit, never really got into the defense thing. Maybe it was something instinctual. Maybe it was something more just a mental way of processing the game, but defense ultimately never entered into Amare's repertoire. The other path that I see for Jalen Duren is Dwight Howard. Again, a physical specimen coming right out of high school. And again, I know Duren had a year of college, but he was still the youngest in the league when he came in at 1 year as a rookie, as a freshman, where you had Dwight Howard not being a true pure 7-footer, but being so physically gifted and physically talented with an excellent amount of hops and timing and the ability to read defense as a defender very well, an excellent shot blocker, with an innate skill for it, an innate ability to rebound, and not that much of an offensive game. It consisted mostly of dunking. He actually ended up on a team with Stan Van Gundy as coach, where they were one of the earlier adopters of the 4-out, 1 in, lots of three-point shooters. Everybody can shoot three-pointers. Everyone can pass the ball as long as your reliable center can clean up any defensive mistakes and clean up on offensive rebounding ends. So those are the two career paths. And the thing is that Amare is remembered very well, partially because of his little stint in Phoenix with Steve Nash, and their pretty interesting, fun run, also with a run and gun style of offense, but slightly differently constructed under Mike D'Antoni. I get confused. But ultimately never really blossomed on defense, and even though you saw flashes of it, which is the part that's very interesting. I'm going to come back to that. With Amare, who's known partially because of his Phoenix stint, but also a big part just because he played in New York in a quasi-successful way with Carmelo Anthony. I think he was already past his prime. He was already injured to the point where his best assets were no longer effective. He did have a bit of a jumper that he could sort of rely on, and he did have that upper body strength that never left him, but his knees ultimately went out in an era when the medicine just wasn't there to repair it and to keep him going. He jumped and hopped so much, he wore his knees down, and that was sort of the end of his productive part of his career. Now, those are the two trajectories, like I said before. You've got Amare, offense, very disappointing defense, even though you sort of see flashes. Or Dwight, where you got all that defense, and you don't really care if he blossoms offense, but as long as he's able to get the putbacks and stuff, it's fine. I think last year it was still a question. This year I think we kind of know. If anything, his career is going to lean towards Amari at this point. Now I'm hoping the health is better. I never want anything bad for any of those guys, physically or anything like that. And I actually really enjoyed Amari and his potential of defense. So I remember with Amari, you knew that if there might have been what could have been with him in Phoenix, if he had had a coaching staff that was more willing to coach defense, is that there was that play, I think it was the playoffs, it was against the Spurs, where Amari contested, I want to say it was a Tim Duncan slam, and he basically had the perfect timing, got his hand up there and blocked it. It was a phenomenal block, and that took a lot of instinct to be able to do that. So you knew there was something there, maybe not at the level of Dwight Howard, but if he had had the coaching, I think there was enough there that he could have eventually become a really good defensive player. Not a great one, but a good one, and then his offense would just allow him to become an MVP style caliber player in the early to mid 2000s and 2010s and stuff like that. Might have even allowed his career to last a little bit longer, depending on what type of defense. If it's like the ability to steal and get more than just block, but like steal stocks and stuff. And because he was being coached by Mike D'Antoni, in Phoenix, who did not care at all about defense, had no instincts for it at all. So what little could have been blossomed over the course of Amari's career, it was gone. It never happened. It never materialized. It was really sad because I think there was something there. So a parallel to that I saw early in going back to Jalen Duren, which is the actual subject of this, is that Duren came into the league raw after just one season in college. And I don't pay attention to college. I don't know what was there. Didn't know what to expect from him. But what I saw was that physique. And in his second year in the NBA, you had the first 4 or 5 games under he who really shouldn't be named, the former Suns coach, Monty Williams. So much cringe. Yeah, we love Monty Williams here. The first 3 or 4 games, Jalen Duren was being put out as a center, as the featured center, as a defensive coordinator for the team on the floor. And between the athleticism and the enthusiasm, the defense, those first 3 or 4 games for Jalen Duren, 2.5, 3 years ago, was phenomenal. It looked reminiscent of Dwight Howard, which is why the comparison started going in my head. Now, my line of work, statistics, it's a small sample size. Duren got injured, an ankle injury, the type of injury where if you're a bouncy type of guy, something to be worried about long term. Eventually came back many games later. It was not the same. It was understandable. It wasn't the same because you're probably not 100% healthy, although they probably shouldn't have pushed him in that case. But like mentally, you get that concern that you're going to re-injure it or injure something new once you've had that type of injury. And it just makes it so that he never really showed that again, ever, to this day. I've never quite seen Jalen. Yeah, can't hear me. Never quite seen Jalen Duren defend that with that enthusiasm again, or with that tenacity again. And I also know that it's really hard to keep that up, but you got to do it sometimes if you have any chance of actually executing that in a playoff situation, and he just isn't doing it. Now, I will say the first year under JB Bickerstaff, Duren improved quite a bit from the rest of the Monty year and his rookie season. He improved, but that was a low bar because his defense wasn't good. It was Andre Drummond-like. But the fact, and he did get better the next year. Remember, this past year, the Pistons won 60 games. Duren was in for most of the games. He even offensively starred while Cade Cunningham was out for a bit with a really freaky type of injury. And his defense was like passable to good at some stretches. So there's growth there. There's opportunity for growth there. And then in the playoffs, for whatever reason, either he had an undisclosed injury or the lights were too bright. Thanks to Jared Allen. He was not good defensively. So usually with the defensive side of things, even when your shot isn't falling, a player with solid defense can still rely on the defense to make some kind of impact on the floor, and Duren didn't do that. Could have been psychological because his offense wasn't doing well. Don't know. All speculation. But that's sort of why I'm making the parallel. There was a flash somewhere. Somewhere you saw a flash. For Duren, it was 3.5 games in the beginning of one of the worst seasons in Pistons franchise history, and then it never returned after an injury. And for Amari, it was like a couple of defensive plays where you saw there was something there, but the team just didn't want to go that way, and so they never did, and really never pushed it in an era where you really needed to be more defensive focused. So yeah, ultimately it's a real question about whether or not at this point we want to see Duren being signed or not, which is unfortunate. It puts the Pistons in a really tough situation because they can't just be happy with being thrown with a book at it, and then because Duren didn't bet on himself last season, not signing an extension, wanting more, he's not getting the improvement, that the bigger salary that he wants. So, and on a related note to that, one of the first videos I ever did in the NBA was actually not about Pistons so much. It was just more of a generic NBA thing, where I was talking about DeAndre Ayton during his kerfuffle of his contract with, again, the Phoenix Suns. Monty Williams there. Mark Stoudemire. That connection is odd. Now, the thing about the thing about DeAndre Ayton was that it sounded like, first off, he's a business guy. He wants to get his second contract, or his first non-rookie contract, and I totally get that as a fellow human being who would love to have a lot of money. So I don't fault him at all for wanting a max. And you had ownership that a combination of didn't believe that he necessarily was worth it, despite actually playing effectively through a finals run, and him even sacrificing a little bit of his own stats for the good of the team. And that's important. I've seen certain players do that in the past, like Jerry Stackhouse as a Piston in the playoffs under Carlisle. And I thought that, as a fellow human, I could see that they did not want to just throw a contract at him. They are already going to pay Booker, and I think Chris Paul was on the book for a bit, and I don't remember the rest of their salary structure because I don't care that much about Phoenix basketball, even in a finals run. But the fact that I thought the fact that he didn't respond well after he actually signed with the Pacers and then got matched was first, you have ownership being a little cheap, saving a little bit of money this way, being okay not having him for 5 full years, as he could have done if he had signed the extension with the team. But Ayton feeling like he sacrificed to make himself look worse statistically, and then he got punished for it. No loyalty, broken promises, and that he felt cheated by the fact he couldn't get as much money as he ultimately wanted and was looking for as a number 1 overall pick, as someone who, again, played very well in a finals berth that was 2 games away from a championship. And it could be because of who Ayton actually was, and I just didn't know DeAndre Ayton, or the fact that he's just a person who got frustrated. I'm worried that that dragging this contract along might lead to sour feelings towards the franchise. And I am concerned about this. This is not something where I like the idea that you're going to be messing with somebody's feelings. A young guy who feels like he earned it, and yes, he cost himself a lot of money by a very awful playoff run, 14 games in 2 rounds. Weird. Big part because of him and the fact that he didn't play just even adequately. But yeah, even if they re-sign him, maybe he gets better, but maybe his attitude becomes a little sour because he's getting cheated, or he feels he's being cheated out of a bunch of money. So the worst thing that could probably happen is he takes the qualifying offer a la Greg Monroe way back when. Now, Greg Monroe was arguably not the same caliber of player as Duren is. Obviously, he never got the accolades that Duren did this past season. But at the same time, I think Monroe was an NBA player who could have played even in the modern era of 3-and-D and run and gun. I think with the right system it would have worked. But then they lost him for nothing. I think Milwaukee got him. And that would be just devastating to not even be able to trade Duren for something and get something for him. So I'm hopeful that the Pistons work something out. And again, I have other fellow Pistons fans who really, really are sour on Duren for anything other than a small contract that he would not accept. So there's that. Yeah.